Richard Galping reporting there. Let's talk to the journalist George Grant, who was researching the threat from Islamist groups in Libya, but had to leave a few days ago following a security warning. George, thanks very much for coming in.
Okay.
Just tell us exactly what this threat was, because it actually came from Benghazi.
The threat did come from Benghazi via Tripoli, and it was an abduction threat, essentially.
So they threatened to kidnap you?
They threatened to kidnap me, to bring me in for questioning. But I didn't really fancy staying about and seeing what that questioning would entail exactly. Indeed.
Any idea who would have made the threat?
Yes, I do have an idea who made the threat. Certainly the groups that were involved. But obviously it's not something that really I want to go into too much detail right now.
Okay. Is there any suggestion that this particular group may be behind this specific threat that has been made to foreigners, the Germans, the British, the French and so on?
Well, I can't speculate on whether it was the same group of people. What I can say is that, in my view, the primary threat in Benghazi does come from militant Islamist groups. They tend to work fairly closely together. One generally knows what all the others are doing and vice versa. And it wouldn't surprise me if the same names that I was looking at are cropping up in this threat. But as I say, I can't say for sure.
Sure. Of course, I mean, the same kind of groups that were perhaps behind the attack on the US consulate back in September that killed the US ambassador?
Yes, possibly.
All right. I mean, having reported from Libya myself in the run-up to the fall of Gaddafi, you could see that there were so many disparate groups with so many weapons. The country was awash with them. And it was clear, once Gaddafi had fallen, that it was going to be difficult getting these weapons off a lot of these groups. Is that part of the problem here?
It is part of the problem, although it has to be said that given that every household in the land is packing a Kalashnikov or worse, it's quite extraordinary just how little gun violence there is.
Right.
And having lived there for 7 months, you know, I never felt particularly at threat, except when, as a journalist, I went to places where things went bang. But that was a different matter, just walking around the streets. You're generally quite welcome. And I think it's something to consider with Benghazi, that these Islamist groups are not popular. They're not liked. And when, after you mentioned Ambassador Stevens, he was killed, more than 30,000 people came onto the streets to condemn that attack. There was a shooting attempt against the Italian consul in Benghazi a few days ago, and large groups came out with placards saying Benghazi loves Guido and Guido loves Benghazi. So yes, the threat is there because the state's control is still weak, but people as a whole, they don't want these groups, they reject these groups, and I think this is more a country in transition than one sliding towards failure.
And are these indigenous groups, or are they groups that perhaps have taken advantage of the power vacuum, the lack of security and so on in the wake of the fall of Gaddafi, who've come in from outside?
Primarily, those that I was looking at were indigenous groups. They tended to be brigades who had fought, often bravely, during the revolution, but they haven't laid down their arms. And the truth of the matter is that if you're still carrying weapons now in Libya as a militia, it's generally because you have some ideological objective or other. Ordinary citizens have laid down their weapons long ago, and as I say, they tend to stay under the bed at home. But the problem in Benghazi is that the state still cannot exert its authority in the way that it needs to, and moreover, it is dependent to some extent on brigades who, whilst operating notionally under the control of the government, still continue to operate with autonomy.
I mean, should we be surprised, frankly, given the events in Mali and Algeria over recent days, and the fact that this whole part of North Africa, the Sahel region, is awash with all kinds of Islamist groups who've been, you know, had access to grind for a long time?
Well, no, although I think the threat precedes what happened in Algeria and Mali.
Okay.
And the threat to me preceded that.
Right, okay.
You know, I was threatened just after Christmas. And these things, they don't just come about overnight. There are underlying currents that have existed for a long time, but obviously you can have catalysts that can provoke specific incidents.
Okay. George Grant, it's good to have you in. Thanks for joining us.